The first one is to ensure that there is an appropriate amount of land available for the different spread of uses. So the easiest way to describe that is probably in the commercial point of view. Mr. Doug Record, our third new member for the Planning and Zoning Commission. And you missed introductions. You might have to wait till after the meeting. But Doug comes to us. He served, I believe, his term limited out on the Historic Preservation Commission. And so they booted him off, and he ran over to the Planning and Zoning, and hopefully he'll fit right in. So the first strategy is to ensure there's an amount of land available for the different spread of uses. You know, commercial is probably the easiest to describe as that, to make sure that there's enough commercial land available for growth that would be anticipated. And not just in general across the city, in, you know, specific locations. So looking at the specific commercial nodes and making sure that there's, you know, an appropriate amount of, you know, undeveloped, if possible, land to support future growth. But that applies to all land use categories: multifamily, single family, you know, industrial, everything. The second point is a very specific one, is to expand multifamily residential opportunities. The tornado last year, I think, exposed some weakness within this community, that we don't have necessarily the, how do I put it, you know, the strongest affordable housing network that maybe we could. There's a lot of housing out there. There's a wide range of different levels. I'm not necessarily an expert, but what I do know is that if someone walks in our door and says, "Where can I put an apartment building?" the number of locations that are appropriate, the number of undeveloped land locations that are properly zoned for apartments is fairly few, to be quite honest. And I think that may have hindered some possible apartment development in the past. I know that when we've had a couple agencies come to the city looking to build affordable housing and had to go through a rezoning process of some sort in order to secure a location, and those are typically very I'm not sure, confrontational, but they can be fairly heated discussions, you know, from the surrounding property owners in front of this body and the city council when it gets to that level. And so, you know, specifically incorporating that strategy. The next one is identify redevelopment areas and opportunities. It's my goal to describe a little bit better what redevelopment might mean. When I say redevelopment, I usually mean demolition. Okay? That's to demolish something and clear the site and build something new there. Okay? That's kind of when someone's speaking of a redevelopment plan in a development context, that's often what it means. That's the flip side of that is perhaps renovation is a good word. And that's usually applied in historic areas and other areas that might need investment and rehab of structures. So rehabilitation or renovation of existing structures within an area. Again, a very necessary thing. But I'm trying to distinguish between the two, because I think it's appropriate for our community to be able to talk about them somewhat independently. And then the last one, very specific to downtown, is to strengthen downtown, and not only downtown in general, but expand some of the living opportunities there, loft apartments, things like that. So the land use categories, so the maps each have a number of different categories, and so I wanted to put this slide up here to describe to you that each one of these categories means, you know, something very important on that map and is referenced within the zoning code. So there's a direct tie to that category and what zoning districts implement that color on the land use map. And so I believe in the staff reports that were in the packets, For the 1996 plan, the page dealing with it, right at the top of the page is a listing of the different land use categories on one side, and then the specific zoning districts that implement that category on the other. So in some respects, you could think of the future land use map almost like a zoning map. Except that it doesn't necessarily match. But the purpose of the future land use map is, a simple explanation is to eventually get the zoning to look exactly like that. Now within each color, there could be multiple zoning districts, and that's where it becomes more of a specific decision by, recommendation by staff or decision by the Planning and Zoning Commission on what the most appropriate a zoning category might be for something that's shown as commercial on the future land use map, being as there's 4 different commercial categories of zoning. But that's getting too far into the weeds. I wanted to make sure that you understood that there's a link between the zoning category, the zoning districts, and the land use categories on the map, and that those are changing with the new proposal. So on one side we see the 1996, and then on the other side is what we are proposing with a number of new categories, and then we've also combined several.
Real quick.
Yes.
So the dotted municipal boundary line, that is current, correct? That's the current boundary line for the city?
So yes, on the map, there is a municipal boundary line. Now that is all the municipalities in Cole County. So if you look out toward the lower right-hand corner, most of that is Taos. Taos went through a voluntary annexation initiative several years ago, where they got a lot of large property owners to sign up voluntarily and annex within their community. And so their city limit lines are kind of wonky.
They did that so that they wouldn't be absorbed by Jefferson City, or?
I'm not necessarily an expert on their specific reasons, but I think it's something along those lines. So.
Young people in town?
Yeah.
I think it had something to do with sewer service.
Yeah.
They were seeking a connection with Jeff City, and so.
What's the square down here that's part of the municipality?
That is Wardsville. Yes. And so another thing that's shown on that map is annexation agreement boundaries. Okay, so it is standard practice for the city of Jefferson, as it is with many large municipalities. When a smaller municipality is seeking to connect to the sewer service or some other utility to support their growth, to seek out some sort of boundary agreement so as it's very clear as to how far each community will grow. And so the town of St. Martin's to the west, left-hand side of the map, and Holt Summit across the river and to the north. Both have annexation, or have prefer the term boundary agreement. Anytime you say the word annexation, everyone gets all excited, but have boundary agreements in place. And so those are shown on the map, and not quite there yet, but we did basically do the land use plan up to those boundaries, and obviously not across them. Changes to the land use designations. We combined some categories, particularly the ones that are implemented by single family together. We created several new categories, particularly the 2 mixed use categories and also a downtown one. Some of the colors are a little weird in here. That is actually red, if you can believe that. Shows up very orange. Pretty red over there. So
You can tell they use this.
you use it a lot more, yeah, and that's the one I'm pointing at. And so that might conflict with downtown a little bit being orange, but and so I was going to go through and describe the new categories, starting with the downtown. So in addition to all the standard categories that we pretty much carried over from 1996, slightly amended in some cases, we created several new ones. One specifically on downtown. If you look at the 96 plan, the downtown is a mishmash of different categories, and we thought it more proper to just circle downtown and call it what it is, downtown. And come up with specific recommendations for this very, very important feature, quite frankly, for our community. So we're basically separating it out and recognizing there's no single land use category that really can encompass the different mix of uses, that we think need to be downtown. Not only different mix of uses, but different styles of buildings, the storefront commercial versus, office type uses on the Capitol Avenue portions of downtown, and, and more, I'll call it corporate or larger office buildings, some with even drive-throughs on McCarty Street, banks and financial institutions and such. So anyway, first one is downtown. The second one we've labeled as center mixed use to distinguish it from the other mixed use category I'm going to talk about next. So center mixed use is really targeted toward older, more historic areas where a mix of uses is appropriate, and not only mixed uses, but sometimes different styles of buildings. So there is, for example, the Capitol Avenue area, which is a historic district, actually has a mixed-use zoning applied to it. But then also the High Street area, which is a different character of mixed use. It can have some storefront commercial, kind of mixed in with older homes. And so we've designated the center mixed use category to try to encompass a lot of that. Quite frankly, the two areas we've proposed, both are mixed use areas that were recommended by the adopted neighborhood plan. So Capitol Avenue and High Street for the Central East Side neighborhood plan, and then the South Side neighborhood plan had some mixed use recommendations along Dunklin Street and Broadway. So, but I'll show some of those to you on the map later. The third category we've labeled suburban mixed use. This is basically our attempt to try to, expand the amount of uses that are available in a lot of commercial subdivisions that have been located throughout the city, but also some areas where we feel it's appropriate that a mix of apartment units and usually office commercial or very low intensity commercial uses can kind of harmonize together. The example I have shown up here on the screen is an area off of Lorenzo Green Drive, south of Ellis. Used to be old Route B, if you've been here long enough before the highway was constructed, but there's a mostly office park area, but then back behind it there's a mix of offices and apartment units. So those are apartment units, those are apartment units. I think one of these is a long-term care facility, if I recall. There's a daycare and a number of vacant lots, which we've quite frankly had calls in the past of, can I put apartments there? And it's all zoned PUD, that the planned unit development category that requires a very specific plan, go through a fairly extensive process to get approval for development. So there's this area and several others across the community that we're really targeting for a mix of, instead of just calling them commercial or multifamily residential, to basically call them both. And then the fourth tool within the plan is redevelopment areas. The 1996 plan outlined a very large number of areas that it recommended for what's called redevelopment overlay. I wanted to show this on the screen. It doesn't show up very well in this room, but there is a tremendous amount of property that they designated that redevelopment overlay. Basically everywhere in town where the recommended land use did not match up with the existing zoning. Okay, I've always had a problem with that, and we actually incorporated some stuff into the zoning code to try to encourage or support redevelopment in some of these areas, and it never really worked. It never got implemented. It was never used by anyone privately. And, I know that if you go to other communities, I think the word redevelopment will mean other things. But the manner that I've usually heard it used in our community, and I've used it myself, is a manner of, quite frankly, demolition. There's certain areas where the sites are cleared in order to support new development that is nothing like the character of what was there before. And so I wanted to show this to you to give you that idea that they tried to address redevelopment in '96. It didn't really work. And so we want to change direction on it and be a little bit more specific as to what it is and where it is. And so, again, the colors don't show up very well, but basically have dramatically reduced the amount of areas that we would point at and say that redevelopment needs to occur there. Up on the screen is those areas. I'll go through them very, very briefly. One area is off of Union and Case Avenue next to the high school.